Hello, everyone. So good evening. Thank you for joining the Hong Kong Arts Administrators Association Late Night Arts Talk series. I'm David Tsui, the Honorary Treasurer of the Hong Kong AAA, and also the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Dance Company. I will be the moderator of tonight's talk. First, we would like to thank for the U.S. Consulate General Hong Kong and Macau for their kind support to make our talk series be a successful one. Before we officially start the talk, I would like to bring your attention for a few house rules. The talk duration lasts for 1 hour, expected to complete by 10:30 p.m. Hong Kong time or 10:30 a.m. US East Coast time. During the talk, only moderator and speakers are allowed to use video, audio, and screen sharing function. If participants would like to ask speakers questions, please write the question through chat box or Q&A box. We will pick the relevant questions and may answer them in the Q&A session. Hong Kong AAA will record the talk and reserve the right to use the recording ticket. Okay, on behalf of Hong Kong AAA, please join me to welcome our two speakers tonight, Professor Tseng and Professor Kelvin Maifeld. Hello. From a brief introduction of the speakers' personal bios, and I will show you now very quickly. Okay, let me share with you. Double click. Okay. Professor Kelvin Maifeld, the President of Association of Arts Administration Educators, AAAE, Founding Director and Professor of the Master of Fine Arts in Arts Leadership Program at Seattle University, and a Senior Consultant with Arts Consulting Group. Previously, he was the Managing Director of the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, producers of the Tony Award-nominated musical In Ain't Nothing But the Blues, Executive Director of the Denver Center Theater Company, and many, many more. So I'm just giving a very brief introduction of Professor Kelvin. And Professor Tseng, Arts Management Educators and Consultants, author of the book Principles of Arts and Management. Professor Tseng is the adjunct and guest professor of Chinese University of Hong Kong, University of Hong Kong, Central Academic of Drama, Beijing Dance Academy, Shanghai Conservatory of Music. Previously, Professor Tseng was the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Arts Festival Society, the Secretary General of the Hong Kong Arts Development Council, and Head of Radio 4, RTHK. Okay, so from the brief introduction of our speakers' portfolio, you can see one major common thing. Both speakers are highly practically experienced as well as academically knowledgeable, who are just perfect for the matters and issues of concern for tonight's talk. Because tonight our topic is a sustainability plan for post-coronavirus period. So I think tonight is the fourth talk already. So many of you should have joined the last three talks, and there are lots of questions or issues has been discussed and come across. And tonight we will concentrate or touch on part of our talk in the following issues. About the arts project cycle, the value chain, from creation to production, distribution, promotion, consumptions, and review and learning. Training of arts administration professional, educational institutions, for example, the course structure, curriculum design, internship program, etc., etc. To design a sustainable plan for post-coronavirus period, both for the arts groups as well as for individual arts administrators. And tonight, we may be talking about personal observations by the two speakers, some enterprise stories, inspiration, what should be equipped for the future. So without any delays, may I ask Professor Kelvin Maifeld to start your sharing first. Thank you, Professor Maifeld.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And thank you for this kind invitation to participate in this conversation. I'm thrilled to be sharing the screen with my dear friend and colleague, Sun Man. We've spent many days and evenings talking about these issues through our Association of Arts Administration Educators. So it's really an honor to be here and to be a part of this. I'll say it many times, but part of what was challenging for me in thinking about this presentation is how little that we know. And we're definitely, and we all know this around the world, we're entering a period of just great unknown. And I think there's opportunities because of that, but I also think there's some challenges. So I have a few slides that I'd like to share, and I appreciate David giving us the arts project cycle, because that really became a guide for me to think about these things. So thank you, David, for that. So I will share my screen now. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
I like this picture because this is our campus in springtime. And for those of you who've ever been to the Northwest, you know we get a lot of rain and gray days. So I like this picture to show what our campus looks like when the sun is out and it's a nice day. It also shows right now our campus is closed. So we have no students on campus. We are still in spring quarter right now. So all of our instruction this quarter, with very little notice, about a week's notice, shifted to online learning. And I know that's true for many universities around the world. So today, I'm focusing my remarks on the performing arts, though there's many things that I think are applicable to the visual arts. But my background is in theater, and so it's the area of the performing arts that I know the best. It's also the area that I keep in closest contact with as I do consulting work. So I'm going to focus my comments today really on the performing arts. So I used David's production arts project cycle to think about really what I think is going to be happening in the coming months, if not coming years. And so when we start with creation, already many of you have been watching and participating in live streaming events. And recorded events. And I think what's happened in the United States is presenters, in particular producers, have had to shift their content to the virtual world. And what I think is going to happen in the future is it's going to be some combination of these two. There will most likely be virtual work that's presented by different companies, as well as live work. And we'll get more into, what does that mean as far as audiences go. But I think the creation part of this art cycle is going to be shaped with both virtual and live happening probably in a simultaneous way. When I think about production, and I think about all the theater productions that I've been involved with, as I was thinking about our talk today, I thought, boy, it is going to impact every aspect of the production cycle. For those of us who've been around theater or even other forms of the performing arts, we know that certain performers are great on camera, and there are certain performers who are fantastic on a stage in front of an audience. And those aren't always the same people. So in theater, for example, I oftentimes, because we were only producing live work, we didn't think about if someone had credentials being an on-camera actor. But I think because of going back to the creation cycle, when we think about virtual and live, I think we'll start casting things differently. We'll be casting performers who are comfortable both working in a virtual and a live environment. It will definitely change the rehearsal process. Theater is a very intimate process. You bring actors into a rehearsal hall or dancers into a rehearsal hall, and they're in close quarters with each other. There's a lot of oftentimes physical connection to each other. And because of COVID-19, I think it will forever change how we rehearse performers. I've talked to some theater friends who were working on productions before this hit, and they're having to go back to the beginning and think about, do you rehearse 2 actors at a time? Do you change the blocking of a play because you don't want the actors to be close together? So it's really causing everyone to think about a variety of things. The other part of this is set design. You know, when a set designer creates visual images, they're thinking, right, in the past, they've been thinking about what does that mean to have a set on stage in front of an audience. But just like with casting, I think set designs will change depending on if they're going to be used on camera or in a live performance. Because of so many factors, I think the length of the run, so the number of performances that any group does is going to change. And what I think is already, well, I'm hearing about already in Seattle is that some companies will have fewer number of live performances and then find more ways to have their work done virtually. So they're still trying to reach a significant audience, or maybe the same audience, but they're going to do it through the two formats. And then certainly the venue, where does this happen? And I know, David, you may talk later about your own company, but you know, just figuring out where are they going to perform, when will they have access to that space, how much is controlled by the venue owners and operators, and how much is controlled by government regulations. And again, this, as I said at the beginning, you're going to hear me say frequently, there's so many unknowns, and that's one of them, is when can we have access to the venue. Distribution, I actually find this is one of the areas for opportunities. I think with many companies, and I'll speak to Seattle again, a production would run here for 4 weeks, and if you were in Seattle, you saw the production. But you never had a chance if you lived in Hong Kong or New York or in Paris to see that production. And I think as more and more performing arts companies figure out how to record and stream their content, it allows them to develop a global audience. And that's not going to happen overnight. And I linked this with artist unions, because in the United States, many of our performers are members of unions. And the unions in the past have had very strict rules about using images of artists on film or on camera because they were trying to protect their members. So I think the unions are going to have to be creative along with performing arts organizations to figure out ways that that they can work. Then there's the whole issue of copyright protection and ownership. Once something is out on the web, can you truly control it? And I know many arts groups in Seattle are trying to figure that out. You know, what are the security measures that you can take virtually to make sure that the organization that produced the work still owns it and can control where it's seen? And you know, we're fortunate in Seattle to be in the land of Microsoft and Google and Facebook and many other tech companies. And I know Microsoft in particular is looking at ways to help arts organizations figure out a way to protect what they create. In the promotion part of the arts cycle, it's going to require different strategies for different platforms. A lot of arts groups were already looking at this as they used social media and virtual promotional efforts to promote what they were doing live on stage. But now I think you'll have to have a situation where you have one strategy for your virtual work and one strategy for your live work. And there will be some overlap, but I think there'll be ultimately different strategies. The next part is really starting to look at more of the consumer standpoint and the idea of consumption. I think most of us during the virus and during the pandemic have relied on on-demand television. You know, you decide at 10 in the morning you want to watch a show, you sit down, you tune on your TV and whatever cable provider you have, and you watch it. So it's very much on your time when you want it. And just like I'm saying up under creation, under virtual and live, I think that's going to change as well. I think arts groups, performing arts groups in particular, will find ways that some of their content is available on demand and other content will be on set dates and times, similar to the old model, if you will, when people bought tickets for a specific event. And then the review and learning. When I teach this process, I always talk about the evaluation phase. To me is the most important. What have you learned from the experience? What will you change in the next iteration of the cycle? And I think in this particular case, what we're going to be looking at is it's going to be evolving in response to like government regulations, which I mentioned a minute ago. When will we have access to venues? How many people can be in the venue? And then also consumer response. At the end of my talk, I've linked to a couple articles. One was in American Theater Magazine, and they surveyed patrons in the Washington, D.C. area, and 50% of the people they surveyed said, even when the theaters reopen, I'm not sure I will go. I will still be afraid to be in an enclosed space around lots of people. So that's a very powerful message, so that, you know, I think oftentimes on the producing side, we think, well, you know, if we get it ready and it's on a stage, people will show up. But I think in this time, in this place, people will be very careful about what kinds of events they go to, where the venue is, how far apart will they be when they're in the audience. And so all those things are going to impact review and the learning cycle. Then David also asked us to think about how this will impact training of arts leaders. And this idea of looking at course offerings, curriculum design, and applied learning. In my program, which you'll see in a moment when I share the schedule for our program, we've embedded the applied learning throughout the program. So our students have to do a practicum in an arts organization every quarter when they're in the program. Excuse me, I need to take a little sip here. And so I think that's going to change, and it's already changed this quarter, as my students were not physically able to go and work in arts organizations. So their entire practicum is being done virtually. It's being done remotely. And that changes the nature of the work and I think the learning. This is just a screenshot of our program. And I thought this would be the easiest way, and I'm just going to highlight a few of the courses that we're already talking about changes to reflect the post-coronavirus era. Certainly when you think about marketing the arts, as I said on my previous slides, I think we're going to have to look at teaching marketing in a different way. I think the skills that our students are going to need when they graduate from our program are going to be different than what they've been in the past. Because we were traditionally training people to market live events, and now they're going to have to be marketing virtual events as well. Certainly financial management. We are entering completely unknown times when it comes to the financial survival of arts organizations. The way in which organizations generate income and donations in the United States is changing. And fortunately, we've had some emergency relief funds that have been provided by both government and non-government entities to help arts organizations work through this, this period of time. Leading staff, you know, this course that we teach in spring quarter is going to change dramatically, because if the bulk of your staff is working remotely, they're not in person, it's going to change how you manage them. It's going to change how you motivate them. It's going to change how you retain them. If you have a great team, you want to keep your great team together. I look at strategic planning, and I'm on the board of another organization in Seattle. It's a choral group, Seattle Men's and Women's Choruses. And one of the things we were set to do was to approve an annual budget along with a one-year artistic plan. So traditionally, like in most performing arts groups, our artistic director comes up with the season, and then we build a budget to support that season. Well, we decided a few weeks ago that that was a waste of time, that we're now going to do only a 4-month artistic plan and a 4-month budget. And so every 4-month cycle, we're going to go through that process again based on what we know at that point in time. This particular organization that I'm referencing uses public venues. One is our concert hall where the symphony plays, another is where the ballet performs, and we have no idea when we'll have access to those venues. And so it's impossible to do artistic programming and budgeting if we don't know when we'll have access. Resource development fundraising is already changing dramatically. Several of my students this quarter are working on how to do virtual fundraising events. In Seattle, and this is true in many parts of the United States, but the arts have relied on galas and auctions and special events to raise money for their organization. And now in Seattle, those events are having to be moved online. And so obviously, if you're not having a gala dinner where people dress up and sit at nice tables and eat good food, it changes the whole experience. The good news so far is many of those virtual events have actually generated more revenue than the live events did a year ago. So right now, at this moment in time, people are supporting organizations even without these traditional gala type events. Certainly law in the arts is going to change. We're going to have to teach the course to protect intellectual property that's both online and live. And currently that course, in fact, it's running, it ran last winter, is very much based on, you know, negotiating contracts and protecting copyright protection and intellectual property for live events. So as you can see, this is just a snapshot of the things that I think will be changing in my own program. And I know through AAAE, our association, many arts leaders and faculty members are thinking about these things. So I just want to move on and think about, in each of these areas, what are some of the significant shifts that I think will be happening. Certainly in course offerings, I think there's going to be more focus on use of technology. In my program, we don't really train people to use particular software. We expect them to get that either on their own or through their practicum experience when they're working with arts organizations. I think now we're going to have to rethink that. We're going to have coursework that specifically relates to how do you produce live performing work virtually. And I will rely on my students to lead the way, because this is not my strength. I'm the old generation. And so this is a whole new era for me. And so I want our students to figure out how best to do that. And I'm confident they will. And as I say in the second bullet here, the current focus is on producing live events. Now we're going to be shifting to producing virtual and live. And all of the elements that I mentioned earlier, I think students will have to think about, and we'll have to offer courses that relate to this merging, if you will, or this parallel producing cycle of virtual and live. And then, as we've all learned all around the world, right now you have to be flexible and nimble. And now I think we have to teach it. I think we have to give opportunities for our students to learn how to be flexible, to, even when you have plans. As I was joking with one of my students yesterday or last week, I said, when I was producing theater, I would have plan A or plan B. Now you have to have A, B, C, D, E, F. And you might end up going with plan F, you know, because things are changing so quickly. You have to have multiple scenarios that you can respond to quickly. In curriculum design, again, I think there's going to have to be more integration of technology into the courses. We're going to have to change our assignments, because now we have to assess students and their learning in new categories of skills. And these are not things that we've normally assessed, because we didn't need our students to know these things. We're going to need to find guest speakers. My program relies heavily on guest speakers from our arts community, and we'll need to find people who are comfortable producing in this new environment and who can come and talk with our students about it. The blue box here, I'm most excited about, because in the past, I think our students would ask for the rubric for an assignment, and then they would follow the rubric and they'd get a good grade. And I think where we're entering is a phase where really more student creativity is going to be necessary and encouraged in our assignments. So when they do projects and presentations, as one faculty member, I will really encourage our students to think about the creative solutions to these problems. Applied learning, which is our internships and practicum. As I mentioned, they're already all virtual this quarter. That's going to continue for summer quarter. You know, I think that changes the experience. One of the reasons we have practicum is we want our students to be inside organizations learning about how they work. And if that can't happen, how does that change the experience? We need to help our practicum and internship supervisors understand how they discern what the work is that students are doing. You know, if they're not physically seeing them ever or rarely, how do they assess that the work is of a high quality? I think this will mean building a portfolio. We've always focused on portfolio development, but I think for our students to be most competitive in the marketplace when it comes to looking for a new job, they're really going to have to develop a strong virtual portfolio, one that will show that they have the capabilities and skills to do this kind of new work. And then I think it increases the importance of internships. I think applied learning will become even more important as students think about how they prepare themselves to go into the job market. So in summary, I'm just going to hit a few high points here. Arts administration education has to change quickly. We cannot rely on the old models, the old methods. We're going to have to really prepare our students to work in new and evolving ways within arts organizations. I think students, this goes back to the portfolio idea, they have to effectively tell their story to potential employers to really let them know what they're capable of doing. I think the visual arts initially are going to have an advantage. And I was talking to a friend of mine who is in charge of public programs for the Seattle Art Museum. And, you know, they have already figured out a way by controlling the number of people entering the museum to distance people while they're viewing the work. And so I think a gallery and an art museum and visual arts spaces tend to lend themselves more to social distancing than the performing arts do. So I think initially they may have some advantages. I don't know that that'll last over time, but I think initially they will. I think we're going to see a lot more content evolve because of consumer behaviors. So if an arts group sees that the bulk of their audience is watching online on demand, I think they will adjust their programming to accommodate that. I think we're going to see the economic challenges of this linger for several years. In Seattle, when we had the previous recession, it took about 2 years after the rest of the country was back from the recession before the arts caught up. And I think that's going to be true during the post-coronavirus era. I think consolidation is inevitable. We're already seeing some mergers in Seattle of arts organizations who individually cannot survive. But if they merge with another organization, they work together, both organizations can have a future. And then lastly, what I'm seeing is innovation is really being rewarded. The companies that are coming up with creative solutions to this are getting rewarded by donors, foundations, individuals, et cetera, who are making grants to support their work. And then ultimately, I think it's how audiences will vote with their dollars. You know, they will decide to support and attend organizations who have innovated their work. So I just want, I will share this when we share our slides, but just these are some of the things that I reference regularly. Can't say that this morning. There's some great resources. These are all hyperlinked to different websites. Arts Ready is one in the United States that we used. It was created after Hurricane Katrina. This organization came into being when they were trying to figure out how will the performing arts survive in New Orleans after the hurricane. And now all these years later, they're really an important resource for us to think about how to survive the coronavirus era. And then just today in the New York Times, I mentioned this, the fall of autumn. I just posted that article as well. And so here's my contact information, and I encourage anyone, please reach out to me. I learn most from people who are in the field and working. So please share your stories, your questions, etc. I would love to have a conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kelvin. So just a very brief remark of what I get from Kelvin's talk in the last 20 minutes. Two key issues that I thought Kelvin talked about. One is going into the virtual world in practice. So everybody, like the artists and arts organizations, have to think about how they will face with the future's development, including going into virtual, okay? And secondly, new technologies. Because we have so many new technologies emerged during this period of the coronavirus period. And some I have never heard about, and I have learned a lot of things actually during these 6 months in Hong Kong. So, but these two issues are interrelated because when you need to go virtual or you have to overcome some technological problems, then it means in the curriculum, I mean the teaching in universities, you have to redesign or to refine how you teach or how much you teach. Because when you, I remember a few years ago when I teach in universities in a design school, at that time, we suddenly find that many of the business world MBA program, they start to talk about design thinking. Because design thinking, the way the designer think is very effective for people in the business world to tackle the complicated business issues and problems. So a lot of these MBA school actually they start to teach design and or design thinking, yeah. And now in the teaching of arts administrators, we have to think about technology now, which Kelvin just said. In the previous time, you have to bring with you to the course your technology skills and abilities. But now we have to teach you as well in order to make it more effective or efficient in your work. Okay, so this is what I just briefly conclude from Kelvin's talk. And how about Professor Tseng? It's your time now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David. First of all, thank you for the invitation from the Hong Kong AAA to share in this late night talk. It's my great pleasure to be in a good company of Kevin and David Okay, so I will share my PowerPoint. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, thanks, David, for providing an excellent framework for discussion. Can we move to the next slide, please? I think, yes, actually your framework is a wonderful framework for the value chain in terms of from creation to consumption. All that. I think in my sharing tonight, I will concentrate much more on the consumption part and on consumption behavior there, because I think that is what, in terms of art organization, will decide what they have to offer in the end after the pandemic there. So, as Kevin mentioned, that because of the pandemic, the production channel and the distribution channels are damaged there. So those are taken by technology. So that's why it's not surprising to see that our online offerings becomes the main distribution channel. Suddenly we see everything online. I try to kind of draw up a list of what online stuff there are or being offered that we can see in Hong Kong as well as I guess in anywhere else in the world. And I'm not going to go through this whole list except to kind of it uses as a checklist and highlight some points. Obviously, most organizations are doing using their archive material and just to stream them and really for a branding purpose or remind you how outstanding the performances are. But for me, what most interesting would be the kind of the new products they produce because during this time. And of course, we have a few streaming of live performances or open rehearsals, not many. And the other category that interests me greatly would be the streaming of live performances at sometimes unusual or multiple venues. I'll give you an example that I think some of us have seen streaming of performances from Lifehouse. And I'm actually will be playing a 1-minute extract from one which took place recently in Hong Kong. And also elsewhere, there was a chamber music performance in front of the Terracotta Warriors. So things like that you do not see normally. And then the other category would be the specially produced online videos of selected works where, for example, the Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestra put together the Lion Rock, a version of the Lion Rock song to really as a morale booster, and the Hong Kong Symphony Theatre produced almost similar things. And we also see online videos of performances, sharings from home. These are either performances or even cooking. We have a wonderful example from the Hong Kong Ballet on cooking in the kitchen, which I thought is wonderful, very entertaining, and also great PR. Of course, we have online interviews, online discussion like this one, online classes. And again, the Hong Kong Ballet actually established an online channel as a platform to put on all these different things. What I think we need to be mindful is, yes, we are doing all these, but exactly what purposes do these offerings serve? That's something that, as the presenter, of course, we were thinking about that. But after the pandemic, when we look at this list, probably when we decide what to continue, we might have to, the purpose may not be the same. They would have to serve another purpose. And also the financial implication. Right now, I guess, particularly in terms of manpower, we are more flexible. After the pandemic, what would that mean? So my next slide, please. We need to think about the next slide, please. So what to offer in new normal after COVID-19? Of course, the big question is, will we be back to normal or will we be facing the new normal? I think it has this particular, not only social distancing in Hong Kong, we also have another problem, whether we will again get into street violence very soon, or actually in the last few days again. So we would need to look at how will the consumers' behavior and their attitude change in the new normal. I think Kevin already mentioned, and David also mentioned, will the customers go back to live performances? Or how many of them will? I guess for people in our business, we do think that live performances are irreplaceable and they'll be around. And I also read a study actually in the UK that say they survey people are willing to pay for higher prices when they go to the theater again, because we all realize with social distancing, maybe we can only sell maybe 1/6 or 1/5 of the capacity. So we have to no choice but to raise the ticket price. But yes, if some people are willing to pay for higher prices, what about their frequency of attendance? Would they be coming to as many performances before, or would they be more selective? They would just come to maybe 50%, as they used to. What will some of the new online consumers that we have accumulated over the pandemic, because we offer them freebies, would they actually become paid audiences? And a key question, what online offerings, the list, for example, the list we looked at just now, will continue to interest our consumers when life is back to normal, when they are perhaps facing the computer less. However, would our plan B or plan C, maybe live streaming or video on demand, would that become a regular offering? In fact, I think we realize that most of the things that we look at in the last list are not technologically, are not anything new. It's just that because of the pandemic that everybody is stuck at home, then they are forced to actually become consumers of that. But once it's back to normal, what will survive and what may not survive. And particularly for administrators, we will be very keen to know whether they would actually be willing to pay for these online offerings, or who is going to pay for these online offerings. If customers are not willing to pay, do we still keep them free for all, or would we just keep the freebies for some selected members? I think one of the speakers mentioned last time, she just keep it for her donors or people who actually pay her sponsors, all that. And we need to continue to explore new or alternative modes of art engagement. And whilst we're doing that, I think we need to think about what values can each of these offerings add to the appreciation or the engagement of the audience. When we are doing more and more different offerings, do they actually offer additional values, or they are just repeating? And of course, whilst we are considering all these, one of the key considerations would be how to minimize the risk, how to minimize our risk and not just put everything into one basket, how to diversify risk. I would now want to share two examples with one example with you. So if you could help me I would share a video with you, which is of a performance called The Show Must Go Online, presented by a local group called Music Lab. This performance actually features about 20+ local musicians, including of various background in jazz, classical music, Chinese music instruments, and fusion, etc. And I think two things are particularly interesting. Can we have the video shown now? Two things particularly interest me. One is that its stream is from a live house, and they use different locations in this tiny live house, including the kitchen. So I think they are turning a disadvantage of the venue into actually an attraction. And secondly, the interesting thing is they actually, whilst everybody is making things free of charge, this is actually a charge US $8, not a lot, about $50 Hong Kong, but it's charged. And I talked to them afterwards. They actually have several hundred people supporting them. So I thought this is a really interesting example of enterprising spirit. They're trying new things. I get we can't show you more than what you have. So now let's move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. I guess if we were presenters, if we are programmers, we will be re-examining, reviewing all the different possible offerings, and also as well as our consumer segments. When I'm talking about consumer segments, I guess we are not just talking about the audiences or our pay audiences. We must be mindful of people who support us, who click onto our online stuff. So well, I'm just trying to make a template, and this is really a hypothetical one. The text of no particular value. I'm just trying to bring out the concept that we need to look at the different audience segments there and the different consumer segments, the people who get our online stuff, mainly interested in our online stuff. Whilst if normally we are just offering in terms of offering live event, the charge live event, free live event, and online promotion. In future, would we be thinking of live streaming, charge live streaming, or free live streaming, video on demand, whether it be paid or whether it be free? That I think these are something that we need to consider. In fact, I guess it's more, even more complicated than that. Kevin just mentioned some of the video on demand are at selected times. So it's an event on itself. So we need to consider how would each offering relates to another or actually affects the consumption of another. If we are making this free, then would people not buy ticket or not pay for some other things? And importantly, we will have to convince ourselves what are the purpose or what are the value of each of these online offerings if we decide to keep them, or if we decide to add in terms of do they have an artistic value, social value, or economic value, or education, and what will be the business model for each of them. The ones that we decide to go in, who will pay for that? If the consumers are not paying themselves, but if this is so important to the organizations, maybe we will find funders to pay for them, donors or sponsors. I think we don't have one answer for every organization. Every organization must decide, must consider what is the right thing for them. But I think this is, we as administrators, this is something that we have to consider, because our role, I guess, is to provide appropriate platforms for the artistic experience and also to optimize value and also the impact of the resources involved. So we can't escape from a review, the examination of our audiences and of the offerings we have. Okay, thanks. The next one. In terms of the impact on training of arts administration professionals, since I'm not running any programs anymore, so my sharing on this part is really very short. I would just share with you that I think that the weightings, I believe that the weightings given to different topics or the approaches in the courses in the programs will be different. And I highlight on certain areas that I think more emphasis will be given or needs to be given. First of all, as Kevin mentioned, the understanding of technology and the impact of technology. And secondly, the hands-on experience. I guess nowadays, when David hires somebody, that he or she would like that person to be able to make videos, to be able to operate things very quickly at this age. And Kevin also mentioned the importance of cross-media knowledge. I think we see in this pandemic, museums, the visual arts, they also need to put out virtual events. So they need event skills, and the performing arts people would need the visual sense. So the importance of creating extra income sources, the awareness of how to exploit intellectual property and new business models, which I guess previously, at least in Hong Kong, is well, the creative industry would pay much more attention on that rather than the NGOs. But I think now the NGOs realize that these are extremely important to them. And last but not least, in terms of the entrepreneurial mindset, which Kevin also mentioned, I think you need to train people who are open-minded, who are adaptable, who are aware, crisis conscious. So the final, next slide, please. So in terms of the a sustainability plan, that my feeling is that there is not one sustainability plan for all, but each of us, each organization needs our own sustainability plan, and also it needs to be an evolving one, because as Kevin mentioned, things change so quickly, changing every day. So even if you have a sustainability plan tonight, tomorrow you have to update it, and in a week's time you need to update. The important thing, I guess, is we need to have a vision for the future. Artists or arts organizations need to have a vision for the future. We cannot really depend on bailout from the government, continuous bailout from the government. We need to be resilient. But perhaps just a final word on at the sector level, on the arts sector as a sector. I guess in addition to special grants, loans, information sharing and discussion, which enables us to work together, we also, it would be nice to have assistance, give assistance to small groups of artists, which I believe the Hong Kong Dance Company will be doing, or is already doing, because the bigger groups are much more capable to do things like that, give more work to the smaller groups there. And also in terms of helping the small groups to raise their ability, their capacity in mounting online offerings. I think a good example is the Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra. It's launching a HKCO Net Festival. They are inviting musicians and amateur arts group, amateur Chinese orchestra groups to give them videos, which they, after their selection, they can actually share on their platform. So these are things that I think we can help the smaller groups at this critical time. I believe more than ever, sector-wide collaboration and advocacy that actually advocating the importance of the arts, demonstrating the importance of the arts in this difficult period is extremely important. Thank you. So that's for me.
Okay, thank you, Professor Tseng. To recap just a bit of Professor Tseng's sharing, I think, again, two very important concepts or issues that Professor Tseng talked about. One is the consumption areas, the consumer's behavior could be changed, and it's very uncertain because it all depends on some key things, such as what are you offering to them, what price are you charging them, or even after the market segmentations, different markets should have different business model. And for each organization that in the industry, they must consider their own business model according to their special circumstances. For examples, such as the resources that they own, because each organization is different from each other. And secondly, one thing I think is very inspiring to me, apart from technology that both Kevin and Professor Tseng talk about, Professor Tseng also talk about entrepreneur. Because for me, from the outside world, from commercial world, in the first 10 years of my life, working life, I think nowadays, now in the arts industry, entrepreneurship mindset has been never so important than now, because of the competitions for the scarce resources is so fierce, not including money only, but also for example, service providers. I give you an example of my own. Today, I make many calls to find providers for online live streaming, because at this moment it's very like a very hot topic, and many production house or many arts organizations, they are looking for this kind of service. So they have so many business to inquiries for them, and we have to join the queue to find some effective and some good online live streaming companies to help our communist production in the coming months. Yeah, so I think nowadays we have to think very strategically and entrepreneur, and also must be very flexible, very important. Okay, so I think two speakers, they have shared their views, and let's see what question we have. And you have, I mean, all the audience, you are welcome to use the Q&A box and the chat box to write down your question. We have a question now here to Professor Maifeld. It asks you, you just mentioned regarding fundraising events that online gatherings are even attracting more revenue than the live ones. And the audience is curious what leads to that. Can you have a bit more sharing with it?
Sure. So I think there's two factors. One factor is we're fortunate in a sense because our local media has really expressed how difficult it is for the arts in Seattle right now. There's been a number of news stories in newspapers and television and radio, et cetera, talking about how desperate things are for the arts and for individual artists and for individual creative people. So when these online events happen, I think the patrons who come to these are ready to be generous because they know how difficult things are. And many of these are patrons who've supported arts groups in the past, and they want to make sure that they're going to be around in the future. So there's that. The second part of it, and I'll speak from my own experience. So I mentioned I'm on the board of the Seattle Men's and Women's Chorus. We were set to have our annual gala in April. The ticket price is $250 per person to attend the dinner. And it's a dinner and auction. So $500 for a couple to attend this event. Well, by moving online, we've gotten away from that. We don't have to charge $500 because we don't have to serve anyone dinner. We don't have to rent all the tables and chairs and all that. And so people, when they come online, feel like, well, I was probably going to spend $500 on the tickets anyway, so I might as well donate that. It's called Raise the Paddle. You know, you basically are committing a contribution to the organization. So they, in a sense, they feel $500 richer at the start of the event because they didn't have to buy a ticket to be there.
Okay.
So I think those two factors together, at least this is what I'm hearing from people who are running online events. They're just finding that people are receptive to the message and they want to do what they can to help.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Professor Maifeld. Well, one question actually from me to Professor Tseng and to Maifeld as well. You know that we just heard, I think I heard 2 days before from The Guardian, the newspaper in UK, and it talked about the possibility of the National Theatre that recently told the staff based on the South Bank in London that substantial job cuts were needed. And according to these articles, I found one very interesting quote from the, I think it's the CEO or executive director of the National Theatre. And let me show you now, I highlighted. My article just now. Okay. I think I used an article. This one. Show me. Okay, here's the quote. The executive director of the National Theatre defended the proposed redundancy this weekend, saying she needs to reduce staff costs by 20 to 30% if the venue is to have a future. Sorry, it was a decision taken by the board and the executive. They should be low suspicions. We are crying wolf. She said the company is voluntarily. She added is partly due to its success at finding funds from outside government subsidies in the past. So it's just like a punishment that she's claiming. And I mean, all the audience should know that the Hong Kong Dance Company that I'm working now is a highly government subvention organization as well. But we are also working very hard to have more income resources, especially from the commercial world and the society. So what do you think? Is this becomes like a warning for the arts companies or venues that they should rely more on the government in the future, or at the same time, asking the government not to cut their money because they find more money from outside world? So what do you think?
Yes, I think I need to ask the question first. I need to look into the net worth of the company right now, because we know that companies in Hong Kong, or David, as you said, most of our big nine, the government actually allowed them to accumulate their surplus up to a certain percentage there, so you can keep hopefully a healthy reserve fund to help you out in circumstances like these.
Yes.
So I think if for the NT, I don't know whether it's because they do not have a reserve fund or they actually they are running out of their reserve fund. They need to do things like this. I would suspect that if they have a decent reserve fund, then that would help them at least for the time being, with not having to do much drastic action. But it seems to me that things like these are happening in the States, in the Metropolitan Opera, in the not Lincoln Center, but in Washington, D.C. as well, right?
Yes, Professor Kelvin, what do you think?
Yeah, it's on one hand, these relief, I call them relief funds, because these were funds that were not expected, and I think so they were very important to keep. They are very important to keep organizations alive during this time. But I have heard from some government officials that the concern is that arts groups will become dependent on this money. And I think Sunman mentioned this, that we're going to have to quickly develop new models because we can't be vulnerable to changes in government policy. So there's only so much money, and the money will run out, and it'll be up to organizations to determine their own funding streams that are separate from government support. There's also concern because many of the groups who've come up with relief funding are annual contributors to arts groups. They have their own grant programs, and there is concern that those grant programs will be diminished because of these relief funds. That in essence, the relief funds are replacing what were long-standing grant programs. That hasn't happened yet, but I think there's a concern about it.
And I think time is almost running out, so we have to stop here. So that's all for tonight. Thanks again for joining us. We hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as we do. And also thank you once again to our two marvelous speakers tonight for sharing with us their thoughts, their insights, and expertise. So, and the last but not least, after leaving the talk, we will send you the post-event survey. Please take a few minutes to write us some comments for our review. All the 4 talks of the late night art talks have been complete, so tonight is the last one. We may have the 5th one later, okay? If you would like to do the webinar replay, please visit our event page or subscribe our YouTube channel, okay? So everybody, a very good night and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.